A simple woman fixed an engine for a millionaire. The next day, a luxury helicopter landed at her doorstep. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. When Jolene pulled over to help a stranded stranger on a dusty back road, she had no idea that her grease-stained hands were about to open the door to an extraordinary future. What happened next might just restore your faith in human goodness. The morning sun cast golden streaks across the weathered sign. Jolene's Auto Repair, honest work, fair prices. Inside the modest garage, soft country music played in the background. As Jolene wiped her hands on an old oil-stained rag, her auburn hair was tied back in a practical ponytail. Her coveralls told the story of 100 engines brought back to life. At 38, Jolene had built something meaningful in this quiet corner of the world. She inherited the garage from her father, along with his simple philosophy: treat people right, and they'll remember. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. Every turn of the wrench, every spark plug replaced, was done with a care and integrity that had become rare. Her customers weren't wealthy, mostly farmers, teachers, and working-class families, doing their best to get by. Jolene understood struggle. She'd lived it, making tough choices between groceries and rent. That's why she never charged old Mrs. Henderson full price. That's why single parents got flexible payment plans. Because she believed in helping where she could. The garage itself wasn't impressive: concrete floors stained with years of oil, flickering fluorescent lights, and a coffee pot well past its prime. But it was hers. Every tool had a place. Every part was organized just right. Disorganized. Chaos was Jolene's sanctuary, a place where she solved problems others couldn't. Her reputation had grown slowly, through word of mouth and genuine care. She's got magic in those hands, folks would say. But the truth was simple. She listened. Engines spoke, and Jolene paid attention. Most problems, she'd learned, had simple solutions if you just took the time to understand them. And so, this particular Tuesday began like any other. She had already changed the oil in 2 pickup trucks and was elbow-deep in a transmission rebuild. When her phone buzzed, Mrs. Patterson, again, her old sedan, was acting up, making those funny noises she always mentioned. Jolene smiled to herself. That sedan was older than some college students, but with a little care, it still had miles to go. She glanced at the photo taped to her workbench, her parents on their wedding day, young, hopeful, full of dreams. They'd taught her that success wasn't about money. It was about lives touched, problems solved, and community held together by calloused hands and open hearts. She reached for her socket wrench, unaware that the day ahead would challenge everything she believed and bring her face to face with someone whose view of the world couldn't be more different. The afternoon heat pressed in heavy as she stepped outside for some fresh air. The quiet hum of summer crickets filled the stillness. Then came the sound, low and unfamiliar. Destiny was approaching, disguised as a gleaming silver car rumbling down that dusty back road. It shimmered into view like a mirage, too polished, too pristine for these parts. The car coughed, sputtered, then rolled to a steaming stop right in front of Jolene's garage. The door opened. Out stepped a man who looked like he'd stepped straight from a high-rise boardroom. Silver hair, perfectly styled, navy suit untouched by the dust. Even his shoes sparkled, probably worth more than a month's worth of groceries for the families Jolene usually served. He moved with the easy confidence of someone used to the world bending in his favor. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice smooth, precise, the kind of voice shaped by private schools and polished dinner parties. "I seem to be having some mechanical trouble. Would you happen to know where I might find assistance?" Jolene wiped her hands on her rag, stepping toward the steaming car. "Well, you found it," she said with a warm grin. "Name's Jolene. Fixing engines is what I do. Now, what seems to be the trouble?" The man nodded politely, extending a hand. "My name is Mr. Ritson," he said, offering his name stiffly. His gaze swept across the modest garage, chipped paint, dusty tools, the hum of cicadas in the heat. There was skepticism in his eyes, barely concealed behind polite detachment. "I wouldn't want to impose," he said, glancing once more at the surroundings. "Perhaps you could direct me to a more established facility." Jolene let out a light, good-natured chuckle. "Sir, the nearest established facility is 40 miles down the highway. But hey, if you'd rather push your car that far in this heat, be my guest." She popped the hood without waiting for a reply and leaned in. Right away, she heard the sharp whistle, familiar and unmistakable. "Just so you know, you've got coolant leaking all over creation. Looks like your upper radiator hose blew out." Mr. Richardson's composed exterior faltered slightly. He glanced back at his car, clearly out of his element, stranded in a place where money, status, and contacts couldn't do much good. "I have an important meeting this evening," he said, checking the sleek watch on his wrist. This really couldn't have happened at a worse time. Jolene didn't look up as she grabbed the flashlight. When is it ever a good time for car trouble? She peered into the engine, nodding to herself. "Good news is, it's a simple fix. That hose is toast heat, and age'll do that. But I've got the part, and I can have you back on the road in 20 minutes. He hesitated, and she caught the look, the doubt, the unspoken question. She straightened and met his eyes. "Look, I know I don't look like much, but I've been turning wrenches since I was 12. My daddy used to say, judge a mechanic by their work, not their workspace." She wiped her hands on her rag. "Give me 20 minutes. If you're not satisfied, I won't charge you a dime." There was a pause, just long enough to feel like a test. Then Mr. Richardson gave a reluctant nod. "Very well," he said. "But I should warn you, expect it at a rather important business dinner." Jolene just smiled, already grabbing her tools. As she worked, she noticed him standing off to the side, stiff and awkward in the dusty lot. His tailored suit looked out of place here. He checked his phone every few seconds, answering calls with clipped tones and growing frustration. Jolene didn't say a word. She just focused on the job, precise, efficient, and steady, because that's what she did. "Might as well sit in the shade," Jolene said, nodding toward an old folding chair by the garage entrance. "This won't take long, but no sense standing out there roasting." Mr. Richardson hesitated, then lowered himself onto the chair, like he wasn't quite sure if it would hold. He balanced his phone in one hand, checking his watch every few minutes, sighing under his breath. Calls came in one after another. He answered each in clipped tones, growing more irritable with every minute. Meanwhile, Jolene worked with the calm, practiced rhythm of someone who'd done this job 100 times, maybe more. Her movements were clean, methodical, no wasted effort, no rush. She'd done this dance before: drain the coolant, loosen the clamps, wrestle the hose free, all while the heat shimmered off the hood. The contrast between them was striking. His world was deadlines, urgency, deals over dinner. Hers was grease, grit, and patience, the kind you earned through long days and longer nights. Steam hissed softly from the radiator as she drained the old coolant. He watched from the shade, skeptical at first, then curious, surprised. "You know," Jolene said, wrestling a stubborn clamp loose, "most folks drive right past this place without a second glance. Funny how a little car trouble'll make you see things different." Mr. Richardson shifted, straightening his tie. "I must admit," he said slowly, "I wasn't expecting to find someone with your level of skill out here." Jolene glanced up with a smirk. "Oh yeah? What were you expecting? Some good all boy with grease under his nails and a chaw of tobacco in his beard?" She gave the clamp one last tug pop, and it finally came free. "Don't worry, I get that a lot. Folks see a woman in coveralls and assume I'm just playing dress-up." "That wasn't my implication," he said quickly, though the flush creeping into his cheeks said otherwise. Jolene didn't press. She just chuckled softly. Of course not. She held up the old hose, pointing to the jagged crack along its seam. See this? Probably started months ago. Just a tiny split. But heat and pressure build over time, till one day boom. She tossed the hose aside and started fitting the new one in. Funny thing, she added, it's usually the little problems that turn into the biggest messes if you ignore them long enough. Mr. Richardson didn't answer right away, but something in his expression shifted just a little. Less irritation, more reflection. And Jolene, without missing a beat, kept working. To his own surprise, Mr. Richardson felt himself relaxing. There was something oddly comforting about watching someone so completely in their element, confident, efficient, unbothered by the heat, the time, or the pressure. You seem to enjoy your work, he said, almost curiously. Love it, Jolene replied without hesitation, tightening a clamp with practiced precision. Every engine's got a personality, its own way of telling you what's wrong. Most folks think it's just nuts and bolts, but there's an art to it. She glanced over at him, a slight grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. You've got to listen. Listen, he repeated, almost skeptically. Sure, she said, topping off the coolant and wiping her hands on the rag slung over her hip. Take your car, for example. Expensive, well-maintained, probably pampered its whole life. But even the fanciest machines need attention. They'll whisper to you, if you know how to hear 'em. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and sighed, tension flooding back into his shoulders. I'm sorry, this one's important. Go ahead, Jolene said easily, walking around to start the engine. We're almost done anyway. As he stepped aside and began speaking in hushed, clipped tones, profit margins, acquisition targets, scheduling conflicts, Jolene checked for leaks and watched him from the corner of her eye. It wasn't just the car that was under pressure. She could see it, the weight he carried, the way he rubbed his temples after the call, like trying to hold something together that had been fraying for a while. Rough day? She asked gently. He looked up, caught off guard by the question and, maybe by the concern in her voice. Business pressures? He said vaguely. Nothing a small-town mechanic would understand. Jolene didn't take offense. She just smiled knowingly. You'd be surprised what a small-town mechanic understands. Pressure's pressure, whether it's in a radiator hose or a boardroom. Ignore it too long, and both'll blow. There was something in the way she said, it's so calm, so certain, that made him really look at her, not just as the woman fixing his car, but as someone, grounded, whole, content in a way he hadn't felt in years. How do you do it? He asked suddenly. Stay so calm, so content. Jolene paused, wiping her hands slowly, thoughtfully. Well, she said, I reckon when you've got work you love, folks you care about, and a roof over your head, what more do you really need? She shrugged lightly. Sure, I'm not rich in money, but I'm rich in other ways, Jolene said with a small smile. I sleep well at night, you know. The engine purred smoothly now, humming like a contented cat under the afternoon sun. There you go, she announced, wiping her hands. Good as new. That'll be $45 for the hose and labor. Mr. Richardson stared at her, incredulous. $45? Are you certain? He pulled out his wallet, still shaking his head in disbelief. $45 for a professional service? That would cost 3 times as much in the city. You're either very bad at business or very good at life. Jolene laughed warmly, folding her arms. My daddy always said there's a difference between making a living and making a killing. I sleep better with the first one. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and held it out. Please keep the change. You've saved my evening. Maybe even my entire deal. But Jolene gently pushed the bill back toward him. 45 is the fair price, she said simply. So 45 is what I'll take. The extra won't make me richer, but knowing I charged you honest will. Mr. Richardson looked at the refused money like it was some strange artifact from another world. I don't understand, he admitted. In my world, everyone wants more. Always more. Jolene gave a quiet shrug, then reached into his wallet herself, pulling out 2 20s and a 5 with practiced fingers. Well, she said, handing back the rest, maybe that's the problem with your world. Sometimes, enough is plenty. He stood in silence, watching her tuck the change into her pocket. As he opened the car door to leave, something made him pause. He looked back. You know, he said slowly, I've built an empire worth hundreds of millions. I own properties in 12 countries, employ thousands of people. But I can't remember the last time anyone refused my money, or treated me like, well, just another person. Jolene gave him a final, matter-of-fact smile as she wiped her hands on her rag. That's exactly what you are. Just another person who needed help. The fancy suit and expensive car don't change that. He extended his hand. She shook it firmly, without hesitation. And in that moment, the vast distance between their worlds narrowed just a little. Thank you, Jolene, he said sincerely. For the repair. For the perspective. For treating me with... He trailed off, as if realizing words weren't quite enough. Jolene just nodded. Any time. Such kindness, he finished softly. Drive safe now, Jolene called as he started the engine. And remember, when that hose starts whispering again, listen to it before it has to shout. Mr. Richardson gave a small nod, almost a smile, and pulled away slowly. Through the heat haze in his rearview mirror, he glanced back at the small garage. Something inside him had shifted during that short encounter, something he couldn't quite name. The woman in coveralls hadn't just fixed his radiator. She'd cracked something open in him he thought was sealed shut years ago. Jolene stood watching the silver car disappear down the road, its polished frame shrinking into the shimmering heat. Then she turned back toward her garage. Mrs. Patterson's transmission still needed finishing and daylight wasn't going to wait. She picked up her wrench, but her thoughts lingered on the man in the suit. That sadness behind his eyes, hidden under layers of wealth and polish. Rich in everything except what matters, she murmured, then got back to work. What? Jolene couldn't know was that her quiet act of honesty had planted a seed, and it was about to grow into something she never expected. The next morning started like any other. Coffee in hand, Jolene rolled open the garage door, already going over the day's tasks in her head. Mrs. Patterson's car, Joe Hendricks's pickup. She'd almost forgotten about the stranded businessman from the day before, until she heard it. A strange sound, not the usual whine of engines, or the rustle of wind in the trees. This was rhythmic, low, and growing louder by the second. The garage windows rattled in their frames. Jolene stepped outside, shading her eyes from the rising sun. A helicopter, sleek, black, and unmistakably expensively descending toward the open field beside her shop. Its rotor wash kicked up clouds of dust, sending the tall grass bending like ocean waves. She stood frozen, jaws slightly open. Nothing like this ever happened here, not in their quiet valley. The aircraft touched down with surprising grace. The roar of the rotors slowly winding down. The pilot emerged first, uniform crisp and movements precise. Then another figure stepped out, Mr. Richardson, only something was different. His suit was still sharp, his hair still perfectly styled, but the tension that had clung to him like armor was gone. He looked lighter, he looked different, now less rigid, more relaxed. "Good morning, Jolene," Mr. Richardson called, as he stepped through the swirling dust, raising his voice over the fading thrum of the helicopter blades. "I hope you don't mind the dramatic entrance." Jolene stood frozen in place, wrench still in hand, trying to make sense of the surreal sight before her. Mr. Richardson. What in the world? "I had some business in the area," he said with a slight, knowing smile. "Thought I'd stop by too. Thank you properly for yesterday. Thank me, she asked, genuinely puzzled. Sir, it was just a radiator hose. Nothing special about that. But there was something, in his eyes something deeper, that said it wasn't just about the car. He gestured gently toward the garage. May I? She nodded, still bewildered, and they walked together toward her workspace. Mr. Richardson took in everything as they moved through the garage, the tidy rows of tools, the faded family photos tacked to the wall, the scent of oil and coffee, and honest work. There was a quiet reverence in the way he looked at it all. You know, he began, after I left yesterday, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about what you said that, sometimes enough is plenty. Jolene set her wrench down and gave him her full attention. It got me thinking, too, she admitted, about that weight you carry. Success. It's not supposed to feel that heavy, is it? No, he said quietly. It isn't. He glanced back at the helicopter sitting idle in the field like a sleeping giant, its presence making the quiet valley feel like a dream. And that's why I'm here. Jolene said nothing, but the air seemed to still around them. I've been successful in business, he continued, but yesterday, I met someone successful in life. That's a much rarer gift than most people realize. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick envelope, and set it gently on her workbench. Inside is a cashier's check for $200,000, he said calmly. The wrench slipped from Jolene's fingers and clattered to the concrete. I'm sorry, what? She breathed. You can't be serious. I refused a $55 tip yesterday, Jolene said, her voice barely above a whisper. And today you're offering me $200,000. Mr. Richardson nodded. Not as payment for the repair, he said gently, but as an investment in something I thought had gone extinct. Genuine integrity. Jolene's legs felt suddenly weak. She sat down hard on her rolling stool, eyes fixed on the envelope like it might detonate. Mr. Richardson, I can't. I mean, that's impossible. People don't just people, like me, he interrupted, voice calm but firm, do exactly what we want. He looked around her shop with quiet reverence. And what I want is to invest in someone who values honesty over profit, who treats strangers with kindness, who finds contentment in simple work, done well. He began to pace slowly across the garage floor, the sharp click of his expensive shoes against the concrete echoing off the walls. Do you know what I did last night after I left here? She shook her head, still stunned. I canceled my business dinner, he said. First time in 20 years I've put something ahead of a deal. He paused, then gave a half laugh, half disbelief, half relief. I sat in a hotel room, thinking about a woman who charged $45 for work worth hundreds, who refused more because it wasn't fair. Jolene reached out and gently laid her fingertips on the envelope. Her hands trembled. But why? She asked. I don't understand. He stopped pacing and turned to face her. Because you reminded me of someone I used to be. His voice cracked slightly with emotion. 30 years ago, I was a young man with principles, but somewhere along the way, I lost him buried under profit margins, boardrooms, and private jets. Yesterday, for 20 minutes, I met that man again, through your eyes. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. I've spent decades accumulating wealth, he said, but you showed me something I'd forgotten existed: wealth of spirit. When you refused my tip, you gave me something more valuable than any business deal I've ever closed. Jolene stood slowly, still trying to process everything. Mr. Richardson, this is life-changing money, but I didn't do anything special. I just treated you like I'd want to be treated. Exactly, he said, his smile touched with sadness. Do you realize how rare that is? In my world, people see me as a name on a portfolio, a transaction, a means to their own end. He looked at her, his gaze suddenly raw. You looked at me, and saw just another person who needed help, Who needed help? Jolene repeated, almost to herself. She looked down at the envelope again, then at the helicopter still resting in her field, and finally back at the man standing in front of her offering to change her life. What do you want in return? She asked cautiously. Nothing, he said simply, then added, well, perhaps one thing. He smiled softly. Keep being exactly who you are. Keep fixing engines with integrity. Keep treating people with kindness, regardless of what's in their bank account. Keep being the reminder that goodness still exists in this world. Jolene felt her throat tighten, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. This could change everything. I could expand the garage, hire help, maybe even, her voice faltered as the dreams rushed in. Maybe even take care of Mrs. Henderson's car payments. Help the single parents who struggle with repair bills. Keep being the person who makes this community a little bit better. Mr. Richardson nodded, his smile deepening. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. The reality of it hit her, all at once, a tidal wave of generosity, faith, and possibility. She shook her head, overwhelmed. How do I even begin to thank you for something like this? He reached down, picked up her wrench from the floor, and placed it gently back in her hand. By staying exactly who you are, he said. By remembering that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. He looked her in the eye. You fixed my car yesterday, Jolene, but more importantly, you fixed something in me I thought was broken forever. Outside, the helicopter engines began to spin up again, the deep thrum pulsing through the ground, swirling dust into the morning air. Mr. Richardson offered his hand one last time. Thank you, he said softly, for showing a lost man the way home. Jolene shook his hand, unable to speak, only nodding as tears tracked silently down her cheeks. And just like that, he turned and walked toward the waiting helicopter. The blades lifted into motion, the aircraft rising above the valley, carrying away the man who had come in broken and left changed.